Okay, so let me start with a single fact. One fact that changes how you see everything that happened over the past several weeks. Trump's ceasefire proposal to Iran, the terms being sent through mediators right now, is essentially the same as what existed before any of this started. Same basic framework, same general structure, with one very significant difference. America is now offering to lift all sanctions on Iran as part of the deal. Let me be precise about what that means. Before this conflict began, Iran was operating under some of the most severe economic restrictions in modern history. Decades of accumulated pressure specifically designed to constrain Iran's economy, limit its oil exports, cut off its access to international financial systems, and force changes in its behavior through economic pain. Those restrictions were not accidents. They were the product of years of deliberate American policy. They represented the most powerful, non-confrontational lever America had over Iran. And they are now being offered as a concession, something America gives to Iran in exchange for Iran agreeing to stop what it has been doing. Which means if this deal goes through, Iran ends this conflict with fewer economic restrictions than it had before it started. And Iran's public response to the proposal was 4 words: do not call your defeat an agreement. So today, I want to do something different from what most coverage is doing. I do not want to argue about who won or lost in any operational sense. I want to trace something more fundamental. I want to show you how the outcome we are watching right now, Iran ending this situation in a stronger position than it entered it, was not a surprise. It was not a reversal of fortune. It was the logical conclusion of a structure that was visible from the very beginning if you were willing to look at the whole system rather than just the official narrative. And I want to show you what it means for the ordinary people who paid for the distance between what they were promised and what the negotiating table is now producing. Let's go through it carefully. Most people, when they hear about a ceasefire proposal, focus on the details, which specific demands are included, which are excluded, who gets what, and those details matter. But there is something more important than any specific detail in the current terms. There is the overall direction of travel. And the direction of travel tells you everything about how the situation actually developed versus how it was presented. Think about what the stated objectives were when this conflict began. They were stated clearly, repeatedly, and with great confidence. Eliminate Iran's nuclear program. Achieve regime change, install a different government in Tehran, fundamentally weaken Iran's strategic position in the region. Those were the goals. That was the promise. That was the justification for everything that followed. Now look at the ceasefire terms. Regime change, gone. It was dropped quietly weeks ago when it became clear it was not achievable. The nuclear program, the original centerpiece of the entire justification, is still in the framing, but the deal being offered does not eliminate it. It negotiates limitations on it. And sanctions, the accumulated economic pressure that was supposed to be America's strongest lever, are now being offered to Iran as a gift in exchange for Iran agreeing to stop doing what it has been doing. That trajectory, from maximum stated ambition to offering sanctions relief as a concession, is the trajectory of a negotiating position that started from a place of assumed strength, discovered that the assumed strength did not translate into the expected leverage, and is now looking for an exit on terms the other side can accept. Former Defense Secretary Mattis said it publicly today. 15,000 targets hit, significant operational results, not matched by strategic outcomes. The early goals of regime change and unconditional surrender were, in his word, delusional. When the former head of the Defense Department uses that word publicly about the goals that justified an active conflict, it is worth paying very careful attention. Now let me show you something that I think is the most important piece of this entire situation, and the piece that most coverage is still not stating clearly enough. Iran does not just end this conflict with the same position it had before. Iran ends it with a stronger position, in several specific and measurable ways. The first and most obvious is the sanctions. As we just discussed, decades of accumulated economic pressure, the most powerful lever America had, now being offered as a concession. If this deal completes on current terms, that leverage is gone. The years it took to build it, the economic cost it imposed on Iran during that time, the diplomatic effort it required, all of that is now being traded away in exchange for an exit from a situation that did not produce the promised strategic outcomes. The second is capability. Before this conflict, the accepted understanding of what Iran could do militarily was based on years of intelligence assessments. Those assessments turned out to be significantly wrong. Iran demonstrated reach to targets that nobody publicly believed it could reach. It demonstrated the ability to maintain sustained pressure across multiple fronts simultaneously across a period of weeks. It demonstrated that its distributed network of allied groups across the region continues functioning regardless of what happens to its central leadership. Every one of those demonstrations is now on the public record. And every government in the world, every country calculating its relationship with both America and Iran going forward, has now seen what Iran can actually do when pushed to its limits. That visibility is a form of power that did not exist before this conflict began. And Iran did not have to claim it, it demonstrated it. The third is the Strait of Hormuz. We covered this in depth in the trap video. Iran has validated in the most visible and undeniable way possible that the strait is a real and functioning lever. Countries paid $2 million per tanker for passage. Countries switched to yuan payments to secure access. Countries stayed neutral specifically because the cost of joining America's coalition was the loss of guaranteed energy supply. The strait position that Iran spent 50 years building was tested under maximum pressure, and it held. That is now established fact rather than theoretical capability. And the fourth is the precedent. Iran, a country that was publicly described as weakened by sanctions, isolated internationally, and facing an adversary with overwhelming technological and financial superiority, withstood that adversary for weeks, emerged with its government intact, and is now negotiating ceasefire terms that include the removal of the restrictions that were supposed to force it into submission. Every country watching that outcome, every government calculating whether American pressure is something to be feared or something that can be endured, has updated its assessment. That update is one of the most significant and most long-lasting consequences of this entire situation, and it entirely benefits Iran's long-term strategic position. Here's what I want to ask you before we continue. Before this conflict began, did you think it was possible that Iran would end it with a stronger position than it started with? Tell me in the comments, because I think how people answer that question tells you a great deal about how clearly the structural reality of the situation was understood going in. Now here is the part I have been building toward across this entire channel. Because the outcome we are watching, Iran emerging stronger, America offering concessions to find an exit, the stated goals nowhere in the final terms, was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying careful attention to the structural logic of the situation from the very beginning. Each video on this channel was one piece of a picture. Today, the picture is complete. Let me show you how the pieces fit. The nuclear fear narrative video showed us that the stated justification, Iran's nuclear program, was doing political work. It was creating the permission for action rather than accurately describing the primary strategic driver. When a justification is primarily political, the conflict it produces cannot achieve strategic outcomes, because the actual strategic issues are not the ones the official narrative is addressing. The Geneva offer video showed us that the nuclear program was available as a free concession before anything started. Iran offered to surrender it completely. The British confirmed the offer was genuine. Hours later, the situation began anyway, which told us clearly that either the decision makers did not know about the offer, a failure of institutional information flow that we covered in the Joe Kent video, or the nuclear program was not actually the primary driver of the decision. Either way, pursuing a costly conflict to achieve something that was already available for free guaranteed costs without guaranteeing the outcome those costs were supposed to justify. The trap video showed us that Iran had spent 50 years building a strategic position specifically designed to make any confrontation with it structurally costly for the confronting side. The strait, the regional network, the distributed command structure. Each of these was built not to win a direct confrontation, but to make direct confrontation more expensive than it was worth. That structure did not collapse under pressure. It performed exactly as designed. The leverage video showed us that patience is Iran's most powerful strategic asset. Every week, the assumed quick collapse did not arrive. Iran's leverage position stayed intact while America's costs accumulated. The side that needs the deal least has the most power. Iran needed the deal less. The price tag video showed us that the administration had already moved from promising victory to managing expectations about pain. 50 days of higher prices for 50 years of no Iranian nuclear capability. A cost-benefit frame that implicitly acknowledged the outcome was not arriving on the promised timeline. And the rigged trade video showed us that the financial consequences of the situation, the costs borne by ordinary people, were not randomly distributed. They followed the structure of power. The people closest to the decisions captured the upside. The people furthest from the decisions absorbed the costs. Each of those videos was one piece. The ceasefire terms, sanctions relief offered to Iran, goals abandoned, Iran's position validated, is the final piece that makes the whole picture visible at once. Sometimes governments genuinely try to achieve their stated goals and make honest mistakes. Sometimes they create outcomes they did not intend through arrogance or miscalculation. And sometimes the systems they build end up producing the very results they were supposedly designed to prevent. The pattern we have been tracing across this channel is the third of those possibilities. Not evil intent, not conspiracy. A system operating according to its own incentives, political, institutional, financial, and producing an outcome that the official narrative was never designed to acknowledge. Now let me bring this to the level that matters most for the people watching this video. Because the strategic outcome, Iran gaining from this conflict, America offering concessions to find an exit, is significant. But there is another dimension that deserves equal attention. During the weeks this situation lasted, ordinary people paid costs. Elevated energy prices across America, higher bills across Europe, economic disruption reaching every country connected to the global energy system. Countries that had nothing to do with the decisions that started this paid the consequences in their daily lives. The Treasury Secretary told ordinary Americans they were accepting 50 days of higher prices in exchange for 50 years of no Iranian nuclear capability. That was the deal offered to them, the justification for the cost they were asked to absorb. The ceasefire terms being negotiated right now do not contain 50 years of no Iranian nuclear capability. They contain a negotiated framework with sanctions relief going to Iran. That is a different deal from the one ordinary Americans were sold. And the people who absorbed the cost of the distance between those two deals, the families paying $4 gas, the pension funds that moved in the wrong direction, the small businesses dealing with elevated supply chain costs, had no seat at the table where the actual terms were being arranged. This is the gap this channel has been tracing from the very first video. The official narrative that ordinary people are given to justify the costs they are asked to accept, and the actual distribution of costs and benefits that the system produces in practice. Those two things are almost never the same. And the people best positioned to see the gap, the people with access to the real information, the real negotiations, the real terms, are almost never the people bearing the costs. Iran told the mediators it had been tricked twice, that every time a peace signal came, a surprise escalation followed. Whether or not that specific characterization is entirely fair, what it reflects is important. The credibility of commitments, the ability to make a promise and have the other side believe it, is one of the most valuable assets any party to a negotiation can have. And that asset, for the American side in this specific situation, has been significantly damaged. Rebuilding that credibility with Iran, with the Gulf states, with the allies who declined to join the coalition, with the ordinary people who were told one set of terms and are watching a different set emerge, is not something that happens quickly. It is rebuilt through consistency, through honoring commitments, through the slow accumulation of demonstrated reliability over time. Here's what I want to know from you. The Treasury Secretary promised 50 years of no Iranian nuclear capability in exchange for 50 days of higher prices. The deal on the table now includes sanctions relief for Iran. Do you think the people who paid the higher prices got what they were promised? Tell me in the comments. So here is what the ceasefire terms actually reveal. They reveal that the stated goals of this conflict, regime change, eliminating the nuclear program, fundamentally weakening Iran, are not present in the terms being negotiated. They were dropped one by one as the gap between the official narrative and the strategic reality became too large to maintain. They reveal that Iran, the country that was supposed to emerge weaker and more constrained, is emerging with sanctions, relief it did not have before, demonstrated capabilities nobody knew it possessed, a validated straight position, and a precedent that every watching government has now registered. They reveal that the pattern we have been tracing across this entire series was not a collection of separate stories. It was one story. The story of a situation where the official justification, the actual strategic drivers, and the real distribution of costs and benefits were three completely different things simultaneously, and where the ordinary people who absorbed the costs were the last to find out about the gap between what they were promised and what the system was actually producing. The relationship between official narratives and actual outcomes is not a clean story of stated goals meeting stated results. It is a complicated, layered interaction between political incentives, institutional structures, and the way systems respond to their own internal logic, whether anyone consciously chooses that outcome or not. Sometimes governments genuinely try to achieve their goals and make honest mistakes. Sometimes the systems they build end up producing the very results they were supposed to prevent. And the only way to understand which of those is happening, the only way to ask the questions that actually matter, is to look at the whole system. Not just the official narrative, not just the operational results, but the incentives, the structural logic, and above all the gap between what ordinary people are told and what the system actually produces for them. Be skeptical, look at the evidence, follow the incentives, and never stop asking how power actually works. Last question. Looking back at everything we have covered across this series, from the nuclear fear narrative at the beginning to the ceasefire terms today, what is the single most important thing you think the people making these decisions got wrong? Not tactically, structurally, tell me in the comments, because I think the honest answers to that question are the most important conversation available right now.